Welcome to the Afghan Eye YouTube channel. If this is your first visit, make sure to subscribe and press the notification bell so that you won't miss any of our new videos. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to episode 26 of the Afghan Eye podcast. My name is Sangar Paikar.
And I'm Ahmed-Waleed Kakar.
In this episode, we are hosting Afghan political analyst Habib Wardak. Habib Wardak is a former lecturer on international relations at Kardan University in Afghanistan, and he has worked extensively for international aid organizations and the Afghan government. Habib Wardak, welcome to the Afghan Eye podcast.
It's such an honor and an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, Wali Jana and Sangar Jana. Thank you.
What I would like to know, first of all, if you would like to tell us a little bit about Habib Wardak. What's your background? Where are you exactly from? Where did you grow up? What did you study?
So I come from Wardak's Jaghatu district. It's located in close proximity to Ghazni.
Yeah, so Jaghatu in Wardak and Jaghatu in Ghazni are...
We are not neighbors. So there's a district of Jaghatu and Ghazni, and there's a district of Jaghatu and Wardak as well.
Okay. Because I thought maybe there is a Durand line between Wardak and Ghazni. On one side, one Jaghatu, on the other side.
No. So in between there is a buffer zone. There's another district of Ghazni, and if you cross that district, you'll get to the Jaghatu of.
Am I the only one? Am I the only one that's getting the sense that Jaghatu has sort of a Mongolian kind of origin in its name? Because I'm thinking of Genghis Khan's son Chagatai. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
So we have a very famous mountain in Jaghatu, which is called Alaku Baba. Probably it's coming from Halaku. But there are all sorts of theories where the name Jaghatu comes from. And to be very honest, I'm not very good with the origins of the historical background of the name Jaghatu. But it's a district located in Wardak province. Jaghatu you have Saidabad, and surrounded by Saidabad of Wardak, and then Chaki Wardak. But then as you go towards the north of the district, you'll be surrounded by the Hazara brothers of Ghazni. So Nahur, Rishidan, and then down south you have Khwaja Umri, which basically leads you to Ghazni Ghazni city. So it's in Wardak province. I was born on the year where you had the Soviet withdrawal happening in 1989 in a remote village called Murad Khan. That's where the headquarters of my father and my uncle, Amin Wardak, a popular Mujahideen figure fighting the Soviet Union back then, where their headquarters were located. So I was born in that very village in Murad Khan in 1989. Like many Afghans, millions of us, we migrated to Pakistan. Ironically, not when we were fighting the Soviets, but when Kabul was being burned, when the civil war was being fought. So we migrated to Pakistan, and I returned back to Afghanistan in the year 2003 under the so-called period of Operation Enduring Freedom, the foundations of democracy, when the foundations of democracy were laid. And I couldn't go to an Afghan school. I went to an Afghan school for a year, and I was struggling in Wardak because I couldn't read and write Pashto properly. I had no choice but then to go to the only American international school in Kabul. It was a small private school in Kabul that closed down in 2014 due to security concerns. So I graduated. I got my high school diploma from the International School of Kabul in 2009, and I was enrolled in Symbiosis International University in Pune, where I got my bachelor's in economics, focusing on economics, but my minor was
Just to clarify, Pune in India.
Pune in India.
Yeah,
Yes.
just for the viewers and listeners that don't know.
Yes. So Symbiosis International University, where I got my bachelor's in economics, that was the major part of it. However, my minor was political science. I returned to Afghanistan in 2012 with a bachelor degree. Um, I worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for about a week until my admission got through into my master's program. So I was the only foreigner back then in our department at the University of Pune's Department for Defense and Strategic Studies. I graduated from the department in 2014 with a master's in defense and strategic studies. My focus was institution building in post-conflict environment and national security studies. I returned to Afghanistan in 2014 after about 5 years of living in India. And I started working on tackling corruption in Afghanistan. It was a UK aid funded project. It was called Business Integrity Network Afghanistan. The whole idea behind the project was to stop the supply side of corruption. And there's always a supply side, there's always a demand side. We had this utopian vision of Afghanistan's vision of transformation, meaning that aid will be replaced by international investment. But if you're being ranked at the bottom of the index as far as the corruption perception index is concerned, constantly, how are the international investors? How will they be interested to invest in Afghanistan?
It reminds me of, I don't know if you remember, there was it was like a bit of a media scandal where David Cameron was overheard talking to his ministers describing Afghanistan, amongst other countries, as fantastically corrupt.
Yes.
The fact that this is a UK-funded sort of project, it reminds me just of that, sort of the irony.
Yes. Well, when we talk about corruption in Afghanistan, to be honest, the less you know, the better you are. And the more you know, the uncomfortable you will be, because it is systematic. Nonetheless, the idea was to create a strong coalition of private sector businesses committed to integrity, transparency, and the international norms of business ethics. And then for a year, after my stint at Business Integrity Network Afghanistan, I joined Human Network International as their country director in Afghanistan. So we worked with the various UN agencies. Human Network International was a global social enterprise focused on data collection and behavior change communication through basic mobile phone technologies. In 2018, I worked with the Ministry of Defence for about 6 to 7 months as their chief human rights and gender integration advisor. And after what I witnessed at the Ministry of Defense, the lack of due processes, the human rights violations, obviously, night raids, the operations, it wasn't ethically just to continue working with the Ministry of Defense.
Before we get into your experience at the Ministry of Defense, you mentioned night raids and whatever. I want to just take a detour back to your family. So you grew up, because I want to get a sort of a better perspective of you, your family, whatever. So you grew up, like you said, in the village of Murad Khan in Jaghatu. Now, what was your sort of family's political background? Because, no Afghan family is immune to being aligned with one or the other faction. We're a deeply factionalized society. What was your family's background fighting the Soviets, post-Soviet withdrawal, and obviously after that during the Emirate? What was your family doing?
So my grandfather, he was a Hakim, district governor for Zahir Shah.
Okay.
And we were the Khans, sort of the Khans of Wardak. The communists used to call us the feudals. So when the revolution happened, when Dawood Khan was overthrown, you had Taraki that took over. My father would disappear in the morning from the village. He would go to the mountains. My grandfather, he would disappear and he would be in the mountains with his long range car rifle, the British made rifle. And he would collect people around him. And my uncle, Amin Wardak, a very popular figure during the Soviet occupation, was living in Tehran, working with some French company because he had graduated from the Lycée Istiqlal, the French school. So
he spoke French.
He spoke French fluently.
Yeah.
So my grandfather writes Amin a letter that he needs to come back to Afghanistan to join jihad. And everybody in my family, a lot of my extended family lived in Kabul, and they were against this notion. A relative of us who happens to also now live in France writes to my grandfather that, who are you fighting against? You're fighting against a huge elephant, and Afghanistan is an ant. And when an elephant puts its leg forward, it's very difficult to push it back. And my grandfather writes to him that it's basically the fate that is going to let us win. So Amin Wardak joins him. My father eventually ran away from the 12th grade because the rumors were spread in Kabul that Ghulam Azad Khan's family have joined the resistance. Amin Wardak is there. So my father quit high school. He was in his 12th grade just before his graduation, and he also joined the resistance movement. Now, the actual resistance started when the communists visited Wardak, Jaghatu, and they were supposed to negotiate a deal. The deal was basically that there was an uprising in Hazarajat, and Jaghatu is just bordering Hazarajat. We have had an extremely good relations with Hazarajat. So the idea was that the district of Jaghatu will be armed, and along with the communist forces, the Hazara insurgency, the uprising should be uprooted. My grandfather agreed to it, and a day before this movement against the Hazarajat should have started, the protocol was already reached with Hazarajat. So people of Jaghatu, led by my uncle and my grandfather, actually turned the weapons given by the communists against the communists, and the district center of Jaghatu was liberated. So that's where the movement started. We joined.
Just two comments, okay? You said that because your grandfather was Hakim, the communists would say your father was the feudal, okay? My father was in Hizb Demokratik Khalq with the communists, and I often talk to my father about it, and I say, listen, like my grandfather was also a Khan and a Malik. So from a communist perspective, my grandfather was also a feudal. And a lot of these prominent members of this party were all, according to their definition, they were the feudals. They were the oppressing class, but they were leading the revolution. And I said, how can that make even sense? This is one of the things that a lot of people, when they talk about the war in the 1980s and how it all started in the late 70s, they forget that it was basically the elite in Kabul that was trying to see the whole country to a different lens. And the second thing I wanted to say is, you see, the communist government was so-called a government against oppression, against all sorts of things, but then they wanted to mobilize a Pashtun district to go after the Hazaras.
Yes.
See, so that's why I'm really glad that you told us this aspect of your story, because this brings so much deep insight into how the conflict evolved in those times.
There were two paradoxes that were very interesting after listening to my father and my uncle. One was that the paradox amongst the Mujahideen were that my uncle and my father were called the infidel Mujahids.
Why?
Because they did not have beards, and this terminology was used primarily by the likes of Hizb Islami and Jamiat Islami.
Yeah, of course.
So they did not have beards. They had mustaches like the communists, and it was more of a nationalistic agenda that drove the jihad. And moreover, the likes of Médecins du Monde, Médecins Sans Frontières, Solidarité International, all these French doctors, they started in Jaghatu. We had one of the best hospitals in Jaghatu run by the French doctors. This gentleman called Bernard Kouchner, who served as the French foreign minister under Sarkozy, was there in Wardak in our village for a very, very long period of time. So every time you had these French doctors, men and women, in coming and distributing medicine, helping patients across rural Wardak, the Hizb Islami, Hikmatyar, and Jamiat Islami would not like that. On the other side, if you look, every time the communists or the Soviets even perhaps pushed us and we were in trouble, you know where did we take refuge? Hazarajat. Said Jagran, a very popular figure. Back then, you did not have the six and then seven parties and six parties. Back then, it was basically rural resistance. And every time Said Jagran was pushed, where would he take refuge? Come over to Jaghatu. And this was the kind of relationship that existed and that still exists between the people of Jaghatu and Hazarajat. But nonetheless, Amin Wardak became extremely popular. He even met George Senior Bush when he was the vice president under Reagan's administration. And that meeting that is recorded had not gone very pleasant between him and George Senior Bush, because Amin had said that we are blamed for being the tools of the United States. However, we have not seen any help from the United States, and whatever that has been given to the orthodox fundamentalists. And because you're telling me that you will ask the United Nations to help our refugees in Pakistan, why don't you tell the United Nations to tell the Soviets to get out of my country? So that meeting is very, very popular.
Just a quick question: to which faction did Amin Wardak belong at that time?
So eventually, Amin Wardak recalled the story that he never joined any political movement, but one time when he was going to Peshawar and Miram Shah, he is being taken into custody by the Pakistanis because they've asked him, where is your identity card? Which which party do you belong to? And he was forced to get a membership of some political party. And because my grandfather was a Sufi, feudal, whatever you want to call it, we had good relationships with NIFA, the Mahazimili, led by Pir Sayyid Ahmad Gilani. So we joined Pir Sayyid Ahmad Gilani, and then eventually we had to leave NIFA because NIFA brought in Rahim Wardak, who happened to be the Afghan defense minister for a very long period of time during Karzai administration. So our stand was that when our house was being bombed, Rahim Wardak was still serving as their military attaché of the communists in Delhi. So we will not accept Rahim Wardak as the deputy for the party. And because of the relationship that Amin Wardak had built with the likes of Abdul Haq specifically and Jalaluddin Haqqani.
So more sort of independent commanders, essentially.
Yes. So they then eventually persuaded him to join Mawlawi Khalis, Hizb Islami. And it was a later period of time, probably 1986, when they joined through mediation of Jalaluddin Haqqani and Abdul Haq when they joined Mawlawi Khalis.
Can I quickly ask a question? What's the difference between Hizb Jalaluddin or Hizb Mawlawi Yunus Khalis, his Hizb Islami, and that of Hikmatyar?
I think in the beginning it was one group, as far as my knowledge is concerned. But then the split happened. There's a very popular saying of Mawlawi Khalis, the Khalis fraction, where Khalis is quoted himself saying that I do not know whether I should be leading the prayer when Hikmatyar is there, or I should be following Hikmatyar when Hikmatyar is there in the prayer. And his followers asked him, why is that? He said, because if Hikmatyar is leading the prayer, I don't know if God will accept the prayer, because you cannot have somebody who has various identities, various minds, various mindsets, where you follow him. Now, if he leads the prayer, he cannot trust Hikmatyar with his sandals. What if he steals those sandals? So this is a very authentic joke of Mawlawi Khalis about Hikmatyar.
Okay.
So it was one group, and eventually it split. But the major commanders such as Abdul Haq, Jalaluddin Haqqani, Amin Wardak himself, and there's one more that I could recall is Mullah Malang, who was quite popular in the areas of Badghis. So these are the powerful commanders of Mawlawi Khalis.
Okay. So your family became part of Mawlawi Khalis, Hizb Islami. What role did your father play?
So until 1992, not much. My father served as a deputy to Amin Wardak, as his younger brother. When the civil war broke in Kabul, Amin Wardak's stand was very simple: that he's not fought the jihad to have to obtain power or have official designation. The Darul Aman Palace belonged to our fighters when Kabul was taken over. The Academy Ulum was our responsibility. The Garnizun and Wazir Akbar Khan, Sharinau, Darul Aman. One more that I could, Sherpur. So these belong to our. So the security and safety of this area was our responsibility. We had extremely good relations with the likes of Ahmad Shah Massoud and Jamiat. In 1992, we had elections in Wardak. Wardak did not participate in the elections, and my father was running for the elections, and he became the governor of Wardak in 1992. And Ustad Rabbani eventually sanctioned it. And my father is quite popular for talking to Rabbani in his Farsi, saying कि Ustad और شما در دفترتان هستین که ما تشریف بیارین, rather than saying که شما تشریف دارین که ما بیایم. So Ustad Rabbani would always joke about that phrase of my father. But nonetheless, when Mawlawi Khalis issued a fatwa saying that the killer and the one who is killed will both go to Jahannam, that's when Haqqani withdrew his forces from Kabul. That's when we packed the next morning. We had to go to Wardak. That's when Abdul Haq also packed up, and everything was left to Massoud, Hikmatyar, Sayaf, Mazari, Muhaqiq, which led to the destruction of Kabul. In fact, Dostum, yes.
This is remarkable because after 2001, we had a lot of Hizb Islami figures in the new government. We had a lot of Jamiat, all these parties who in the 80s, they were the extremists. They were the radicals. And also in the early 90s, they were the most violent groups. But suddenly, everybody forgot about that.
You know, it's incredible what trimming your beard and wearing a suit does, like, honestly.
Yeah.
So this alliance, so when they were destroying Kabul, Amin Wardak actually visits Massoud because we had good relations with Massoud. And basically they want to negotiate with Hikmatyar. And the delegation includes Haqqani himself, Amin Wardak, and they are supposed to go to Pule Alam, where they're supposed to meet Hikmatyar. And actually they are being rocketed. And that's when they say, okay, this is not going to work. Let's just stick to what Mawlawi Khalis has said. Qatil and Maqtul are both going to Jahannam. Let's pack up and leave everything. You could, for reference, you could talk to Ranjbar, who was a communist figure and Academy Ulum. who was there because we took over Academy Ulum after 1992. I mean, we as in Amin Wardak. Nonetheless, when we went to Wardak, you had the rampage of Hikmatyar coming to Wardak. And Rabbani was actually telling us to fight Hikmatyar. District after district, without a fight, we are leaving it to Hikmatyar. And we had a lot of influence in Ghazni because, I mean, Wardak's primary focus was the likes of Paghman, Wardak, Ghazni, and a little bit of Logar as well. So we had a lot of influence in Ghazni. Ghazni also fell into the hands of Hikmatyar. And suddenly you have these rumors coming in that you have the emergence of this group called Taliban that have already made it to Uruzgan. So this is the time where Amin Wardak has already left Afghanistan. He has taken political asylum in France, and everything is left to my father. Apologies. And my father narrates that how do you basically fight Hikmatyar? You know, we were popular, we were strong, we had enough of reinforcements, but if you're fighting an Afghan, and it doesn't feel like you're fighting the Soviet Union. So how do you make sure that you do not engage in this bloodshed, because you've already sort of given up on the official designation, the power in Kabul, the struggle, so why should you engage over here? And that's when he basically contacts this group that has made it to Uruzgan and Zabul. It was the Taliban. So to your reference that, you know, after 2001 they were fighting in 1992, but in 2001 they're around the same table. That actually happened in 1993, 1994. When my father meets the Taliban in Spandeh of Ghazni, just outside Ghazni city, my father complains to him about the behavior of the likes of Zardad, Hikmatyar, his provincial chief called Chorgul, that they're gonna kill more and more, and they're gonna kill more and more, and the response coming from the Taliban is that the reason we are here is basically to wrap all of these various governments up. So we're gonna take care of it for as long as you keep supporting us with logistics. My father is shocked. My father responds to them that how are you gonna fight with these 8 Toyota pickup trucks? But I had 2,500 men, and I have lost district after district. And the response coming from them was that, have you fought? My father said, no, I've not fought. They said, well, we are here to fight because we're going to take care of everything. And they asked my father that by tomorrow evening we'll be in Maidan Shah, meaning that Ghazni would have collapsed. It will be in our control, and by tomorrow evening we'll be in Maidan Shah, just outside the gates of Kabul. And my father calls it a bluff. My father says that tomorrow evening, I see that the lines of defenses of Hikmatyar being collapsing one after the other, and these 8 Toyota trucks, pickup trucks, have basically taken over. It was in Maidan Shah where my father mediates between Massoud and Taliban. Massoud comes to Maidan Shah and meets Taliban. Massoud says that you just cannot go into Kabul from Maidan Shah. You're our brothers. This is the Islamic movement. We accepted. This is a good movement. We will give you Kabul if you go back and come via Logar to Kabul. Take care of Hikmatyar first.
Very smart.
Sorry, I don't want to interject as well, but that was you know, I wrote an article on Ahmad Shah Massoud a while back. A lot of people thought it was like me doing an academic sort of Tupac hit them up kind of thing. but I was basically saying like the image of, you know, the guy who stood against the Taliban from the beginning to the end it's a meme, it's a joke, because even in Kandahar, it was Massoud and Rabbani that told Mullah Naqib, stand down, let them take over. They gave him weapons and whatever. And once again, the rationale was, you know, what's the worst thing for a military organization to be engaged on 2 fronts? Go and roll over Hikmatyar. And once again, as we would say in Pashto, in Maidan Shah, he wanted Logar to go to the Talibs too.
So, and the interesting part is that after, and this is exactly what the Taliban did. They went to Logar, they took over the Hikmatyar base, which was there in Logar near Pur Alam.
Was that in Charasyat?
That is in Chaurasya, yes.
Yeah.
And in the next few days, Kabul was handed over to the Taliban without a fight. There was no fighting in Kabul. Not major. So the Taliban started advancing towards the Shamal of Afghanistan, towards the Shamal, until General Malik trapped them for the first time. So the irony was that when Hikmatyar lost Chaurasyab, that is where the coalition started happening.
Where he became prime minister.
Yes, and that is when Hikmatyar says the Taliban have not fought real men. Let them face Massoud.
Incredible.
Saying it in Pashto, Taliban penarne dia waktu was the Massoud sara wajangi kana.
Yeah.
So this is where Dostum was in coalition with Hikmatyar, and the likes of Makik were there. Makik was there in coalition with Hikmatyar. You had Jamiat, Sayyaf fighting each other, and the next day they're all together fighting the Taliban.
You know what's really amusing is that one of the reasons that Hikmatyar sort of, he objected to the Peshawar Accords. And on one hand, he was like, okay, if you give Massoud the Ministry of Defence, in a country that's war-torn, broken, Ministry of Defence, the guy who runs it is the king, right? So you can't give it to Massoud. But on the other hand, he said, these guys, they're all friends with communists, and how can Nabi Azimi be cool with Massoud and Dostum be okay with Massoud and whatever? And then he does a 180-degree turn. And, forgetting Shah Nawaz Tanay in 1990, he allies with Dostum himself. So it just shows you the extent to which it was, I'm going to mind my language here, but yeah.
Basically, Mawlawi Khalis was right about him.
Yeah, but Mawlawi Khalis, he could have been wrong about other things, but in this case, he was right.
So this is where a relationship between my father now, because Wardak was out of the country, between him and the Taliban was made, and he had an extremely good relationship with the likes of Mullah Ubaidullah Khund, who was the Minister of Defence, who died unfortunately in a Pakistani jail years after the fall of the Taliban regime. He had very good relationship with Mullah Omar himself, where he negotiated on behalf of Mullah Omar in 1998 with the United States, him and the former foreign minister, Mr. Mutawakkil. So my father and Mr. Mutawakkil.
I'm sorry. Can you, I think in the whole episode you didn't mention the full name of your father.
So my father's name is Ghulam Rohani Wardak, and he's popular by the nickname Nanjalai.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So he, after the Nairobi and Kenya bombings, President Clinton retaliated with sending those
cruise missiles.
Those cruise missiles into Afghanistan, and it was Mr. Mutawakkil and my father who went on behalf of Mullah Omar to negotiate with the United States of America. And then September 11 happened. Apparently, we boycotted the Bonn conference. We did not participate in Bonn conference. Amin Wardak himself boycotted the Bonn conference, saying that this is not going to work out. He was given, according to him, various offers to join the new government or perhaps even lead it, but his response was that his stand will be as his stand was against the Soviet Union. So we were always considered the Taliban family in Afghanistan since the past 20 years. My father.
That's quite an amazing twist of events that despite all of that, you then had a career working for the government and everything.
Not just working in the government, working in the Ministry of Defence. It's like Tucker Carlson getting a job at the Huffington Post.
It was merely probably, I don't know how, but yes, it is what it is. But I don't. But my father. So when they needed him, he was an important tribal elder. He was a peace broker. When he did not comply, he became a Taliban mentor. He became a mother of Taliban. So all kind of different nicknames. And in fact, in 2003, one of the first night raid operations that happened in central Afghanistan was unfortunately against my father.
Were you there?
Can you tell us, were you there?
I was not there. No, I was not there.
So could you briefly just, we've spoken about night raids, aerial bombardment the last 20 years. This is the first time we actually have someone whose family is caught up in a night raid. What does a night raid in central rural Afghanistan, Murad Khan, look like?
So Murad Khan was just near our village. Our village is called Sheikh Ali. So we had come back to our village. And there's a little background to it. The little background to it is that once the Taliban regime collapsed, Wardak is just at the gate of Kabul, connecting Kabul to the southern Afghanistan. What we did was we installed our own checkpoints along Saidabad, meaning that you cannot have northern alliances advancing into southern Afghanistan chasing down the Taliban. My father, through BBC and Voice of America, announced that he has become the governor of Wardak, and there are no Taliban anymore in Wardak. And then we sort of supported King Zahir Shah's return to Afghanistan. And through his, so there was a brief conflict between my father and the commanders of Northern Alliances chasing down Taliban deep into Wardak. We did not let that happen. Now, after that, you would have the international troops, their generals, their diplomats visit my father every now and then. And one morning, one of my father's aides comes to my father very early in the morning saying that you have a huge convoy of U.S. military approaching us. So it's a barren land, Wardak, and we are quite in the corner of the district. So my assumption is that they're coming as guests. And my father is like, okay, let me get ready. Make sure that they have chai, food, whatever that is required. So my father says that when he was just coming out of the room, he realized that the house was full of U.S. military. And you had an Afghan sort of interrogator confirming my father's identity. And he was his head was covered with the black cloth, whatever you want to call that. And he was made to sit on snow for the next 3 days inside our house. And the first, so my father now not anymore shaving his beard. He's aged quite a bit, having a traditional beard, a traditional turban, long gown, the Afghan dress. So the American troops joking amongst themselves that we have gotten the right Al-Qaeda or Taliban or whatever. And my father laughs it out, saying that you have mistaken. This is how a traditional Afghan looks like. And the Americans are shocked because my father can speak English. They are shocked. So he was put there for 3 days. And he's then taken to Bagram. He's taken to Bagram. This is also probably around the same time when Haji Naim Kochai was also taken into custody and then subsequently taken to Gitmo. But as soon as the State Department finds out, Ambassador Khalilzad was there as an ambassador. Once he finds out, once Karzai finds out, because my grandfather and Karzai's father were very good friends. He was part of the Mujaddidi group. We were part of the Gilani group, and they would always backbite against the orthodox Hikmatyar Sayaf, and they would talk of because they were from the court of Zahir Shah, they would talk of the arrival of Zahir Shah, and these Hikmatyaris and Jamiatis would take stones and push them away. So once they find out, there was an immense amount of pressure being built on the American military, the Department of Defense, and after about a week, he was put out of jail, and he returned to Wardak. After that, he was given a lot of offers to join Karzai's administration as governor, as deputy national security advisor, as minister of tribal affairs, and he has always rejected it. The backdrop of what happened to our house was our doors were broken. Whatever jewelry that was there was taken, was lost. Some of the antique pistols, guns, a sword from the British era, the British was lost. Pictures, documents from the Soviet resistance were all taken. We don't know if it's the American troops. We don't know if it was the militia who eventually took over from the American troops for that 1 week. Our sheep, our cows had died because there was nobody to feed them for the next many days. They were locked in those in their place of habituation. What happened was that tons, hundreds of trucks of weapons and ammunitions that belonged to us, where we had promised the DDR to be given to DDR, on the contingent that when you have the Afghan National Army built, will be transferred. All of the lists were given of these hundreds of trucks of ammunition. They were exploded by the Americans. That led to the collapse of water dam of Sultan Ghaznavi, which eventually led to the flooding of Ghazni the next year. So that was the backdrop. A lot of people were injured because every time you had these ammunitions that were brought into one location that would be then made to explode, resulted in breaking of a lot of houses, collapsing of a lot of houses, a lot of injuries across the district. People were out on the road in hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands. Whoever was there in Wardak was out there on the road. There's a video recording that is quite old, asking for the release of my father. They went to the gates of Kabul, pressurizing the government to make sure that my father is released. And within a week, he was put out of Bagram prison.
I see. Just fast forwarding to today, because I'm not really aware of the security situation of Jaghatu, and I'm sure Sangar and the viewers aren't. What is it like today? Is it Talib? What's the status?
So since 2001, you had a relatively functioning district center in Jaghatu. But then that was only there until 2007, 2006, 2007. And then once the insurgency in Jaghatu started, it became very, very fragile. Until 2012, you had an American base in Jaghatu, in the district center. Since the inception of American base in Jaghatu, I'm very confident to say that you have had zero number of applicants going even to obtain their national identity card from the district center. Forget about collection of taxes and provision of other services. Once the American base withdrew in 2012, I assume, you have a base of Afghan National Security Forces there that would be given logistics through road until 2014. And every time they would provide logistics through road, it would result in a lot of casualties. Since 2014, whatever that is happening in terms of logistics is happening through air support. And the rule of government is restricted to that one district only, to the premises of the district, which is now a military base.
Yeah.
What they call it is a CP. Across villages, across district, you have Taliban control, Taliban government. They have their judiciary, they have their uh, provision of other services. They manage schools. They make sure what curriculum is taught. You know, who is hired into schools, who is hired into the clinic, who is not hired, be it on government funding. So everything is controlled by the Taliban. Uh, I think a couple of days ago we had a helicopter that was brought down, according to the Taliban statements, in Jaghatu, which was providing logistics to the district center. The government believes that it was a technical error or fault, whatever you want to call it, that brought the helicopter down. There's across Jaghatu on the main highway there was another base that had the heavy artillery. So every time the district center would be sieged by the Taliban, you would have artillery coming from Saidabad and hitting most of the time villages, resulting in a lot of collateral damage. So that was some sort of guarantee, security, safety mechanism for the troops inside the base. But 2 days ago, that base was also taken over in Saidabad, in the village of Abdul Muhaydin by the Taliban, and that artillery was taken by the Taliban. So now it's basically a sieged district center with difficulty in terms of logistics coming to the ANDSF over there, and widening Taliban influence across the territory. And it's just not with Jaghatu. From what I read, from what I see, from what I speak to people, it's across Afghanistan. And I think we are going back to what was happening in the year of 1987 onwards, where you had the districts after districts falling into the hands of Mujahideen, and then it was not very long that they started intimidating and threatening urban centers. Once you take over districts, highways, you basically choke the central government, and this is the nature of guerrilla warfare, and this is what we keep telling our international audiences, the international counterparts, that you cannot have this. You cannot win this. You could not win this war militarily. We would tell them in 2010. We would tell them in 2012. We would tell them in 2014, and we would be, unfortunately, we would be called the Taliban. We would call it the Taliban.
So I want to, on that note, you're basically of the opinion you've had sort of the exposure to sort of the local dynamics that facilitate the rise of the Taliban. Your father's acquainted with the Taliban to some extent, we could say a member of the Taliban during their emirate, okay? And you're of the view, you said 2010, 2014, that you can't win the war like this, right? Now, to fast forward to 2018, because you were talking about your work, your tenure at the Ministry of Defence before I brought you back to your family background. Sorry, there's so much to discuss. But now we're holding that in mind. You're of the opinion that the war cannot be won this way, right? And you're working in the Ministry of Defence. How was your experience in the Ministry of Defence with that viewpoint, being known as, let's say, the Taliban family or the son of a Taliban figure? How would you, what, and furthermore, sort of, did that pose any difficulties for you? I imagine it did, working at the Ministry of Defence.
I don't think I was known as the father or the son of a Taliban member or something like that. I think I was known as my own identity, a reformist, more of a technocrat. However, I've had problems in Kabul where I was nominated for a position at the National Security Office in Kabul as the Director General for Security Sector Reform. And I remember when my background check was happening, everything went through, and one individual said, "Well, do you know who his father is, who his uncle is? They are anti-governments." We just cannot afford to have him here. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed. There were so many other instances where I would get shortlisted. I would be just short of getting the job, and because of the tag that I had, just or unjust. My assumption is unjust. I wouldn't get it. But speaking in terms of the Ministry of Defence, this is what happened. On one morning, I read the news that you have had an airstrike in Wardak's Jaghatu. 17 Taliban terrorists, insurgents, whatever you want to define them, have been killed. The Ministry of Defence always had the terminology of terrorists being used. Because it happened in Jaghatu, so my father still lives in Jaghatu. He still lives among his people. I had to call him to find out if he's okay, or maybe who has died, where it was. And the press release where the name of the village is mentioned is approximately 5 kilometers from my village. So out of curiosity, you want to call. And I cannot reach my father. So what I do is I call his shepherd. My father has a lot of apple orchards, and he does not use chemical fertilizers, so he has to keep a lot of sheep. So I call his shepherd, and his shepherd is a guy from Nahur of Ghazni, a brother from the Hazara community. So I call him. His name is Muhammad Ali. I call Muhammad Ali, and I ask him, and Muhammad Ali, what's happening? He's like, it's khair khairat, everything is all right. And I tell him that, well, what I see is that there was an airstrike and then night raid operation where the military has gone on foot with the international troops, and they have done a night raid operations, and 17 terrorists are killed, Taliban are killed. And because we have a very close proximity with Hazarajat, I could speak the Hazara dialect fluently. And he laughs it out and he says, Na Pakshi Mardume Chupuya. He says, no, all of them were the people of Chupan. Chupan is the village where the night raid operation had happened. And I asked him that, were there not any Taliban? He says, there were only 2 Taliban. The rest were all formers. Now, if you have a designation of human rights and gender integration advisor, and you see this, how fair it would be to continue your work? The other thing was perhaps where you have reports coming in of sexual assault and sexual harassment, where you want to bring in women into the security sector because of the United Nations Resolution 1325, in the commitment that the Afghan government has made, that 10% of the entire NDSF force should be women. Now, a lot of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, sort of grievances are coming, reports are coming, and you basically want to write a anti-sexual harassment or sexual abuse policy. But then if writing a policy will require time, and then training and education of the entire NDSF force will take forever. How do you ensure that this stops right now, or at least diminishes the level of grievances? So we thought maybe write a pledge document where the Minister of Defence, the Chief of Staff, the Deputy Minister, they sign it in front of the cameras, and then pass it on and ensure that every soldier, every officer signs it as well. So when and then they have these newspapers, put it on there. The officers are given those papers, those briefings. They know that the minister have signed it. Even perhaps the president, as of the commander-in-chief, signs it. So there's something serious in it. So you think this is a very good idea, and then you write one and you give it to the minister's office, and the response is, why should I sign it? Pledge against who? Now we are fighting the war. This is irrelevant. So you feel like, that's happening on the human rights aspect. This is happening on the gender integration, the sexual harassment and sexual abuse aspect. No wonder we are in such a mess.
You know, this
So,
aspect of both the night raids and sexual harassment, it's so it evokes so much anger and so much frustration because we keep hearing repeatedly that this current republic is created specifically to safeguard human rights, bring stability, and promote women's rights. But then at the
so
same time, yes, please.
yeah, so this is what we have been telling since day one, was that when the foundations, or you had the international coalition coming into Afghanistan, the agreement was laid down in bone. A few hand-picked people went there and decided on the fate of Afghanistan. Now the internationals wanted to implement and sell democracy to the Afghans. Now, who do you give this authority of marketing of democracy? The likes of Sayof, the likes of Rabbani, the likes of Muhakkik. They never believed in democracy. Why would Afghans in rural Afghanistan buy the notion of democracy from them? So that was number one. Number two was that where you know the amount of corruption, the amount of distortion of reality that was there since day one. It was basically the motives of those who were in power since 2001 was not to make sure that you bring in development to the Afghans, content to the Afghans, but it was how do you attract more sort of donations so that they could sort of aggregate their wealth. Today if you look at how I'll just give you a small example, how the Ministry of Finance distorts reality. Ministry of Finance, for example, when I was there in 2018 and 19, they would say that the revenue has gone from 110 billion AFs to 170 billion AFs since 2014. Now, if you look at it, that is just a distortion of reality. Number one, the increase in revenue does not necessarily translate into economic growth. It's just a pile of cash over there. Number two is, because Afghanistan relies heavily on imports, and that is where the revenue of the government, most of the revenue of government is generated from imports. We are a consuming economy. So if you're to bring this bottle of water from China, let's assume that you were paying $1 of tax or customs in 2014 during Karzai era, and you are paying that $1 customs today. When you bring in at customs, they give you a receipt to pay it at the bank, and it says $1 equivalent Afghani. So you're not paying $1, you're paying Afghani. In 2012, 13, 14, I was paying 45 Afghanis for this as customs duty. Today I am paying almost about 80. So when you're saying that the revenue has increased from 110 billion AFs to 170 billion AFs, if you convert that 110 billion AFs into dollars, you're getting about roughly 2 billion. More than 2 billion, 2.3 billion. But if you convert this 170 billion, you're getting 2.2 billion dollars. So where is the increase? And on top of that, you have these political tourists who have come from abroad. Somebody who has done PhD in animation. He becomes the national security advisor.
Alhamdulillah, Muhib.
Alhamdulillah, with all due respect, if you don't know where is, for example, Jaram located, where is Bala Murghab located, where is the Satukanda, what kind of Qawmuna are living, tribes are living over there. How do you do this?
let's just go back to economy. You see, when we talk about economy, your father owns land where he is cultivating apples. Now, in Afghanistan, we know that Maidan Wardak is known for its apples. All around Afghanistan, they know that the best apples come from that central provinces of Afghanistan. So, how does the produce of Maidan Wardak perform in the markets under current economic circumstances? Like what kind of revenue does it?
So,
Yes, please.
the so understanding the geography of Wardak. By geography, I mean the topography and the demography of Wardak.
Yes.
It's quite different than what you have in Herat, what you have in Jalalabad, Kandar, Mazar, where they have access to ports.
Yes.
You have flourishing businesses there, but people of Wardak they don't have access to that. So, number one, you have very little amount of arable land in Wardak.
Yes.
And number two is, the climate of Wardak is as such that you have the best apples, the best apricots, and whatever little arable land that we have. So the people of Wardak, they invest in two things heavily. One, agriculture, because that's what they can do. Number two, education. And if you look at the administration since 2001, a lot of Wardaks there in key positions, key bureaucratic positions. I'm not going to refer to the political positions. I'm looking at the bureaucratic positions. If you look at the international aid agencies and offices such as the UN, USAID, other NGOs, you'll see a lot of Wardaks working there because they have invested heavily in agriculture. And number two is those who do not have the education, do not have access to land, they become skilled workers. They go to Iran, work for a year or two, and then take a year off. Collect the money, get married, and then, that's how it works. The problem is with the apples that we have or with the apricots that we have, the other distortion of reality, Walijana, would be this whole concept of air corridors.
Yes, that's what I was trying to.
The air corridors. My apples would get sold for 200, not Afghanis, rupees. Because if you go to areas such as Wardak, Ghazni, and then onwards, you will not have people using Afghanis, they're using the Pakistani rupees. So literally, 7 kilos of Wardak apple, we use the weight, the scale of man, which is 7 kilos, would cost at the end of the harvest 200 rupees, which is roughly $1.3. 7 kilos for $1.3. One of the best organic apples in the world. And then 4 months later, we would buy Iranian apples in Kabul market, a kilo for 200 Afghanis, roughly $3. And you have air corridors. I kept criticizing the air corridors. That why should you be happy for a saffron farmer paying a subsidy of $1 per kilo for air corridor? If air corridors are viable, if air corridors are sustainable, why don't you show me how do you take the cabbage and cauliflower of Jalalabad to Middle East? Or grapes of Shamali? It's just a distortion of reality.
And this is something that I think before we move on to your work for the government, just to sum this up, Afghanistan is primarily still an agricultural country. Like the situation of your father is sort of the norm for most of rural Afghanistan. People have either land and they have farm animals, or they work for someone who has land and farm animals. And that's how they survive. So in that economy, when everything from water to even garlics are imported from China, and you see that so much local produce it doesn't find a market. Someone with a degree in anthropology becomes president and claims that and he's presented to the world as one of world's leading economists. He's going to say, you know what? These farmers, we will get their bulk produce, put them in an airplane, and then that airplane, with all its expenses for fuel and whatnot, is going to take that bulk product and sell it in other parts of the world. Like, even a very, very basic level entrepreneur, someone who sells vegetables on the side of the street in Afghanistan, will tell you that doesn't make sense. But still, that was the solution for Afghanistan's economic challenges, and it's mind-boggling how that idea is still like not totally rejected.
I mean, it could work for things like the Afghan carpets. They're expensive, right?
Yes.
The saffron, it could work,
Yes.
It
Or
could work for
karakulis.
karakulis or pine nuts. But where majority of our farmers in Jalalabad are growing cauliflower or radishes or grapes. If you talk to our brothers in Shamali during September, October, your heart will break, because their grapes are sold for less than $1 for 7 kilos.
And we have the best grapes in Shamali, by the way. Like that, they're serious grapes.
They think it's expensive to buy shaftal for their cows, then feed them the grapes.
Yeah. And those cows are all suffering from diabetes from all the sugar that they're consuming.
But yeah, so back to Habib, so with your background, and let's say, I don't want to say your philosophy, but your background and your perspectives and whatever, working at the very heart of the state as we know it, did that get you into any sort of trouble your father got into trouble. I know you said you sort of had your own identity. Did you ever sort of run into the crosshairs of the national security establishment, the police, anything of the sort?
I think there were a few instances where, for example, I was quite popular on Al Jazeera English. Was a freelance political analyst who would appear on Al Jazeera every time. At this one instance, so this is the time where Abdullah and President Ghani were not getting along.
There have been quite a few of those times.
The last one, the presidential elections,
the two side-by-side inaugurations.
Yes. So where I called the government incompetent, I called it corrupt, and I called the elections basically a joke, and I said that lack of participation. You really have to understand. I said, look, the Constitution of Afghanistan under fundamental rights, it says that every Afghan has the right to elect or be elected. Now, if you have back then, the general debate was 40% or 47% of the area under Taliban control or contested. So if you have that much of an area that is controlled or contested by the insurgents, that means a good chunk of population will not have this right to elect or be elected. And as a government, as a state, it's your responsibility to ensure that these people have that enabling environment. So if that many people cannot participate, what happens to this whole notion of inclusiveness? Because they'll not be able to to reflect themselves in political processes. Once you are not able to reflect yourself, what happens is what we know over the past 20 years. So this is not going to work. This is not a national process. And after one of my interviews, I was, to be honest, I was a little harsh. I was
self-introspection.
As soon as I came out of the studio, I'm waiting for a taxi, and then SUVs they blocked the road. They put me into an SUV, my head covered. They took me to an intelligence office. I don't know which office it was. I don't know which department was it. Perhaps the NDS. And they had to take my phone, check my WhatsApp messages. Just intimidation.
I think under the Constitution, you should have been constitutionally, you're entitled to your privacy. And
no, those things they take a side note back there. They're like, for who supports you? Where do you get your financial support? I said, well, go check my bank. I still remember. I said, you will not find more than 8,000 apps over there. I'm still very low on budget. So who supports you? Who gives you financial help? Meaning, being very intimidating. And after 3-4 hours of interrogations, the actual
did the interrogation entail any sort of physical aspect?
It involved a lot of pushing, a lot of don't talk, don't take out my phone, and pushing around. But once I was in the department, wherever it was quite smooth, to be honest. And then they had to change their interrogators. Two of them, one was there and then he had to leave, another came up, and the other one was quite honest and was like, why do you have to go and undermine the credibility of the Afghan government on an international media platform? Who has given you that right? Who supports you? And I was like, oh, it has come to this level. And then another gentleman came in. He was like, oh, you've brought in the ustad, the teacher. You know who his father is. Ghani knows him. He's a good friend of Atmar. Everybody knows him. Why have you brought him? And then he had to basically patch up with me, saying that we are mistaken, we are very sorry, you can go back. And every time I would have an interview, I would get a call from a private number intimidating me, threatening me. There was an instance where I used to live in an apartment on a main road, NC Low. I think at 2 a.m, a few gentlemen came and they started shooting at my windows, and they sat into an SUV and left. I had to approach police, and the response of police was like, why don't you change your routes, change your location, go to a secure area, probably Wazir Akbar Khan or somewhere. And deep in my heart, I was like, well, maybe it's your own people doing this, but this is what it is. So these things actually happened. It was part of the routine. You'd feel like your phone is tapped, not connecting at times. You could hear other voices. It was there. Every time I wrote or had an interview, criticism would come. You had Facebook messages coming in. My Facebook was hacked for some reasons. That was there. It was, and it led us to a point where when you would go to an international media platform and you wanted to talk about your own perception, whether you liked it, whether you did not like it, you would think 10 times and try to mend your views to make sure that you don't get into trouble, though you did not want that to happen. So because you remembered the phone calls, if you change your phone number, they would have your phone number very soon. So that was that. That was part of the parcel.
This is something that I have heard especially in the last couple of years, from multiple people who are not just active in media, people who give interviews, but generally people who are uh, quite well known within their own community or people who are very well known on social media, they all tell the similar story. Okay, the,
The paradox, Sangarjana, was that we would visit for roundtable discussions to various embassies in Kabul. We would go to various political offices of the international community, and over there we could talk openly about um, our perceptions, objections, and But when it came to the Afghan side, you did have horrible experiences. You did have. I remember a few friends that I complained to. That this is happening, and this shouldn't happen, and they said that they had received similar threats. So you either fall into the same perspectives that they want you to pitch, and if you don't have that, you will basically be you'll be tagged.
yes,
They might call you a Taliban, a Thai Taliban. They might call you
Niktai Posh Talib.
Niktai Push Talib, and this is what it is. I remember one meeting. It was done at the Camp Resolute Support. You had the International Coalition Generals there and part of the Afghan community, us. So this included people who were working in the government, those who were not working in the government.
So just to interject, is this when you're at the Ministry of Defence?
No, this is just after that.
Okay.
This is just after that. So in the meeting, the question that was raised was that how can we win in Afghanistan? How can we win this war in Afghanistan?
and who were present there?
I'm not going to name them, but quite a few of us. So you had various responses, very interesting responses.
Any famous people?
A lot of famous people. One of the response was that the international community have not done enough to suppress the Taliban. Increased.
Now I really want to know who it was.
No.
I know. But anyways, okay. So whoever it was, they don't feel enough was enough.
Increase the drone strikes.
Okay.
Increase the drone strikes. One response was we should increase our military strength in terms of number. Make sure that we have police checkpoints and DSF checkpoints across Afghanistan. Proper wiping, sorting of rural villages are done. One was increase more in what we had the international troops. What we had the Obama surge that was required again. And when my response came it was very simple. I said, look, we have had 150,000 boots on the ground, what we call the Obama surge. You did not have a diminishing insurgency. Instead, you had an intensifying insurgency.
Yeah.
Village after village, district after district, and province after province. I recall in 2003 and 2004, for that 1 year I spent in Wardak after coming from Pakistan, where I said I didn't do well in the Afghan school because I couldn't read Pashto and Dari. I recall we would listen to BBC Radio and Voice of America Pashto every evening. They had Pashto services. Every once in few weeks, you would have a news coming in saying that you had a explosion and Helmand. Every few weeks, you would have one odd report coming in. But by 2005, it was almost every 2-3 days that report coming in, not just from Helmand, but now also from Kandahar as well, and Uruzgan as well.
And then later Zabul, and it spread, and it continued to spread.
And by 2011-12, it had already spread to the north. In 2010, you had the Obama surge to stop this spread, but it further intensified. Why? Because I told them that an assessment needs to be done. That whether your local partner, which is the Afghan government, is able to deliver or not. Had your local partner been successful in selling this notion of democracy to the Afghans, the internationals would have succeeded in their mission, whether it's an intervention or invasion, whatever. But one big factor losing in Afghanistan was because of your local partners. They indulged in corruption. They were not the right people for selling democracy. They were corrupt. They were warlords, and Afghans had already had their experience years back, decades back. And number two is, as an international, when it becomes difficult for you to differentiate between your opponent and a local Afghan, and you are calling collateral damage as part of the right sort of casualty, then you are in deep trouble. The Soviets have been on this route. Now the fundamental question is, how do we win? You go and talk to them. Sort it out through negotiations. We have said this. In fact, my father have said this. I don't want to sound as a spokesperson for my father. But my father had said this in 2011 and 2012. I recall a very good meeting in 2012 when I'd come from India on a vacation. Karzai had tried his best to incorporate him into the government. He had refused. In 2012, you had this massive American convoy coming into our village. And it had generals from background from the US Embassy, and they wanted my father to form a local police, a local militia. And my father had told them that, what have you not learned from Najib? Because local militia then becomes General Dostum. And so they were like, what is it that we need to do? They were like, go and talk to them. And the fact that if I'm to invest in local militia, if Wardak's neighbor Ghazni and Logar are not secure with porous borders, how do you expect Wardak to be secure? With your drone technology, your satellite technology, your Humvees and your armored vehicles, K9 and whatnot, billions of dollars, if you cannot take care of the insurgency, how do you want to wrestle? Why do you pushing me to wrestle with the Taliban? This is not going to make sense. And this is what we said earlier, go talk to them. And in fact, this is what my father had told them in 1998 when he visited the United States. That you just cannot do it militarily. But the irony is that they are now talking after 17, 18 years.
So in this meeting, you've got people advocating for more drones, for more killing, for more war. The internationals, the big generals and everyone else are there. What is the response to your suggestion, which is the total polar opposite and which is what your Afghan colleagues do not want to hear?
So the internationals have this habit of being very good listeners. They wouldn't react, they wouldn't judge whether you're right, whether you're wrong. They'll agree with you. But the reaction do come from the Afghans, the colleagues, And the first reaction is, how can you talk to the terrorists? How could you talk to the terrorists?
Because that's what history is defined by. But yeah, anyways.
And today, it's still there. I talked about distortion of reality. I'll come to that. But after the meeting, I would get calls. I would get threatened. The tag became quite popular. Even one of my students, when I was teaching, I'm not gonna name the student. He eventually joined one of the security ministries. He's quite popular. So there was an issue with him cheating during an examination because it was a master level course, and this was we used to call it the unfair means. So your examination had to be cancelled. So in his examination committee, he said that, well, because I'm part of the government, he is pro-Taliban, that's why he cancelled my paper, not because I was cheating and the evidence was there. It gets to that extent. Now, distortion of reality. Now, we all know the father of Hamid Karzai, quite popular in cars, Abdullah Khan, a popular figure somewhat during the Afghan resistance. If I ask you who was the father of Ashraf Ghani, it'd be difficult for a lot of Afghans to answer.
Shah Jahan.
Yes, Shah Jahan. He doesn't come from a very popular political family. In 2014, when people started chanting the songs of Ashraf Ghani, because I don't know who had ranked him the second best thinker in the world, some magazine or some.
Sangar, I think we know who that was.
Somebody,
Someone
all right?
who now regrets it.
And
someone who could not regret it more.
And a lot of Afghans, to be honest, a lot of Afghans thought that he was principle driven. He would fix things up, corruption, rural urban integration, which is a huge problem as far as insurgency is concerned, and But then when Dostum became his deputy, I had written a very short note that I still have dated. I said, this is not now principle driven. This is now power driven. And this man can go to any extent for the sake of power. This was in 2014. And he is so good in distortion of reality, in other words, lying, that he himself feels that he is saying the right thing.
That he was.
This reminds me of, when these sort of interviews and whatever, and he was essentially marketing himself as, well, look at the way I managed the drawdown of the troops, and now it's under my presidency that the troops will be withdrawn. So it's...
And Logar, he openly said, I fixed the entire country, didn't I?
Yes. It was in Paktia, yeah.
In Paktia.
No, you're both wrong. It was in Paktika.
Paktika.
Yeah.
Now, he kept saying that he has a plan for the Afghan peace, and it's going to be the honorable peace. Since 2007, 2008, you had the High Peace Council, if you recall it.
Mm-hmm.
Since 2008, these political elites, this government, whatever you want to call it, have failed in creating that internal consensus among themselves as of what kind of peace do they want. First, the High Peace Council was sort of a joke, because it was led by Ustad Rabbani, the late Ustad Rabbani. Now, if the way the jirga works in Afghanistan, it always has to be a neutral party that comes in between and fix things up. Now, that High Peace Council was formed by all these people who were part of the government. How could you have a side negotiate between two opposing sides?
Yeah, and
then when Ghani took over, he started having this bragging. He went all over it that he has the plan and strategy for peace. It started with the Kabul process, what they used to call it. The Kabul process, they used to call it. And I kept saying that he is basically distorting reality. He does not have any plan. He started bringing ulama. There was a Loya Jirga, which brought in people. Mind you, those people who were representing Jaghatu and Loya Jirga had not been to Jaghatu for the past 17 years. So what kind of Loya Jirga is this?
Habib, you mentioned something.
Sangarjan, if I just complete this one phrase. Now, if you look at the tweets of the Ministry of Defence, the Ministry of Defence would come up with figures, some random crazy figures, that if you add all of them up, it becomes so far they've killed 80,000 Taliban. I don't know where that many come from. Every day 100, 150, 200, 300 killed. So they use the word terrorists. The statements of NDS would use the word terrorists. You would have R calling them insurgents. Yoghi. Some other government department calling them proxies. You even heard the word proxies. Now these three words means three different things. If they are terrorists, why should you go and speak to them? Those people who were sitting at that meeting with me, they are right. Why should we speak to them if they are terrorists? If they are insurgents, then why are you calling them terrorists? Because you need to go speak to them if there are grievances that needs to be sorted out, whatever. But if they are proxy, why talk to the proxy? Talk to the proxy master. Sort out your issues with whoever is coming up with those proxies.
You know, this is a very interesting point you raised. And to be fair, he did do that. Okay, let me finish the point I'm making. In 2005-ish, he sort of, Ashraf Ghani came into power and was on a pro-peace, anti-corruption ticket, right? And he said, initially, right now he's obviously done a 180, but initially it was about improving relations with Pakistan. He visited Pakistan. He went to, I don't know what the cemetery is called, but he laid like a wreath of flowers at sort of Pakistan's martyr cemetery, paid his respects, spoke to people in GHQ in Rawalpindi, and essentially, I need you to bring the Taliban to the table. And the Pakistanis exerted, because they thought this was the guy that they could finally make peace with, they exerted quite a lot of pressure on the Taliban, but not enough to be able to bring them to the negotiating table. Indeed, it was in that sort of context that the story about Mullah Omar also came out, that he'd actually passed away, and it was Mullah Mansour that was leading the Taliban. But now Ashraf Ghani, President Ashraf Ghani has gone, and he's undercut, let's say, the Afghan proxy, and he's gone and engaged the proxy master. But the Taliban did the exact same thing. The Taliban undercut what they see as an American proxy and went and spoke directly to the proxy master, right? So all is fair in love and war, but it was on that basis that why are the Taliban not speaking to us, right? Why are they going and why are they speaking to Washington, D.C.? This is unfair, this is unpatriotic and whatever. But if we think of it very critically, the two of them they've only done the same thing. It's just that one side was a lot more successful.
Which is very true. Even this perception exists in predominantly in India, which I'm quite familiar with, where they say that Taliban is merely nothing but they used to at least say that has changed quite predominantly now, is that the Taliban is nothing but a Taliban proxy,
a Pakistan proxy,
and a Pakistan proxy. And I always have said this, that Taliban is a local phenomena. It's a local insurgency. Whether right or wrong, I'm not here to justify, but a local phenomena which simply cannot be uprooted. You go after them with your drone strikes and your airstrikes, that will result in collateral damage. And here we go, we have the right recipe for the intensification of this insurgency. Yes, however, there is Pakistani influence. It was there in 1996. It is there today. But that Pakistani influence does not translate into control. And the Taliban might have their own justifications for this influence. But it is simply not like tap water where you close it, it stops, where you open it, it starts flourishing again.
This brings us to the next point, and that's the something that you mentioned already, is that while the representatives of the international community in Kabul were eager to listen to you, and they acknowledged when you said that war is not the solution and they should negotiate, people in Kabul who are supported by international community, they have their own will, they have their own objectives, and they have their own interests. And for that reason, if we take the Taliban perspective, this is a puppet government created by the Americans, and if we get rid of the Americans, this government will evaporate. Now, in the last year and a half, we have seen that despite the fact that there is a US Taliban agreement, people in Kabul are pursuing their own agenda. And the fact that they have their own interests and their own agenda is also contributing to this situation where everybody is talking about peace, everybody is talking about negotiations, but because of those conflicting interests and conflicting agendas, nothing is materializing.
War is an industry by itself. I mean, it was this war that has led to fattening bank accounts of various Afghan stakeholders who were part of the government since the past 20 years. I mean, if you're at least 30% of your population, 40% of your population is living below poverty line, and your various politicians are putting on Patek Philippe watches, where it has come from. War industry. The more war is there, the more income is being generated for them.
Okay.
So
I wanted to go back to something you said earlier. Okay, I think this is something when we talk about the growing inequality and a select group of people becoming very rich and powerful, and the rest of the country is suffering. This is one dimension of the problem, but there is another dimension, and that is very closely related to your background. You said that your grandfather was a hakim, okay?
yes,
And I want to contextualize that for our audience. Because your grandfather was a hakim, during political turmoil, he automatically played the role of a leader in his community in Jaghatu. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, from a communist perspective, he was a feudal and he was part of the oppressing class. And we know that in rural Afghanistan, basically most of Afghanistan is rural, except few pockets of urbanized centers. In rural Afghanistan, we still live under a situation where society is formed around certain figures who have some authority, whether it's religious authority or they are from a particular family or from particular respected family. Those people are the authority. That means that people often go to those people, ask them for their help, support, guidance to resolve conflicts, etc., etc. I think for a lot of people in Western society, but a lot of Afghan diaspora who have lived, who were born in the West or who have lived most of their life here, they are very ignorant of the fact that the society in Afghanistan, the way it functioned, is that those people who have some standing in the society, they were also, despite all of the notions of oppressor class or everything, those people were actually serving the interest of their community. It's not like,
there's a saying that I don't know if you've heard it in Sangar, but it's a saying that I've heard sort of in my village in Shamali. It's "Ya qiran da jebim nist ismin Fateh Khan," right? I've got this really lofty, for people that don't know, I've got a very lofty title, Fateh Khan, it's very sort of commanding, but I don't have a penny or half a penny in my pocket.
And this is something that people should understand, that in a society where the elites in rural community are either imams, spiritual leaders, or tribal leaders, or local hakims, or whatever, in that society, those people often are not just there to exploit everyone. They actually are intertwined with the community, and they're serving their own community. So what happened after the communist revolution is that they started killing all those elite, and they tried to drive those people away. And those people then, like your grandfather and your father, they became significant figures in the opposition against the communist government. What happened in 2001 is that first we had a wave of extermination of traditional elites in Afghanistan, or they were exiled. And the people who eventually became presidents and rulers or whatnot in Afghanistan, like Ashraf Ghani and other figures, ministers and whatnot, and members of parliament and members of Senate in Afghanistan, they are not people who have a like a background where they are considered as respected people in our society. They don't have
I will.
yes, please.
I'll just give you two very short stories. I'll try to keep it as short as I can. I recall my father saying this story to me when I had returned from India and I had gotten a job. My father asked me about the salary, and I told him that it was XYZ figure dollars because it was with an international aid agency. So he said, "Son, I wish you had come down to Wardak and actually taught Wardakis about what you have learned. Forget about your salaries and your dollars. I wish you had done that." So I asked him, "Dad, you have been busy with the people every day, feeding at least 30 to 40 people for lunch. What is it that you have gained?" My father was very, very straightforward. He said, "Look, once you had the Operation Enduring Freedom, once the process of DDR started, we gave up everything, the list to the DDR, everything was done, we compiled our weapons, and I was sitting at home. And I was actually tired of people coming to me every day. Somebody is having a land dispute, somebody is having something, the other thing." He was actually really tired of it. And the next morning, you had the American raid on our house, and he was taken into custody. And he said, an American officer, and my last interrogation at Bagram prison came to me that one of our demand from you is that go talk to your people. They have been out in thousands of numbers in snow and asking your release. And we have not seen that in Afghanistan so far. So he said, back then he realized that, he was being very shukr, to God, that, these people have actually made him proud. And when he actually comes to Wardak, and he sees these thousands of people who have actually gone to the highway to greet him, he realizes that what kind of a selfish man he was when he said that I'm just too tired of these people coming with their problems to me every day for lunch. I remember in 2011 when these diplomats and troops had come to my father to ask him for the creation of local militia. I'd gone home and I'm basically getting those fancy cups with a plate underneath it with some candies and some dry fruits to make sure, these are the international guests. And it took me a while. My mother and my sister, they were actually busy cleaning those fancy cups and, teapots and stuff. And my father actually follows me into the house from the guest house outside, saying that why it has gotten late. When he realizes that, I'm busy with all of this hospitality, he got really, really pissed. And his emotions were were uncontrollable. He said, when my villager, when my elder comes from so and so village, walks for 2 hours, he has a problem. You guys just give him a green tea and with one toffee beside it. These internationals, they have everything in their homes and their offices. They don't deserve this. Why have you not brought this out for my own villager and for elder man from so and so village when they come and visit me? Sorry. So this is what's happening. And then since 2003-4 that he has come out, every day you have these people come, because for a very, now you have some level of Taliban judiciary and government, but for a very long period until 2011 2012 there was just a complete vacuum. Who would take care of their issues? It was these tribal elder, and my father was just one of them. In 2008, if I remember properly, I was in American school and we had the news of my father visiting Kabul. After 2003, yes, everything was gone. My father had quit politics. When the High Peace Council was being set up, you had the likes of Mr. Mutawakkil, you had the likes of Mr. Zaif, Haji Naim Kochai, late Haji Naim Kochai, which was from Ahmad Zai's, a very close friend of my father. They had all been out of the Gitmo prison. So through Qayyum Karzai wanted to start some sort of Pashtun consensus through which the insurgency could be tamed. So they were brought to Kabul, invited to Kabul, and when we heard that my father is here and he's in the guest house of Qayyum Karzai, I visited my father with my cousin in Kartese area. We had to wait the entire day for the meeting to get over. Once the meeting got over, all these people came out. Qayyum Karzai was there. We were waiting for my father, so I had to go and kiss his hand, greet him. And his driver, Nemat Ustad, had come in a 1986 Toyota Corolla. And when Qayyum Karzai saw that Corolla, he was like, oh, Commandant Sahib, why don't you take this key? I will ask Mr. Karzai to buy me a new SUV. You can have this one. I know you don't like him. I know he has been harsh on you. He has put you in jail, or his government has put you in jail under his leadership. But you take this. Since we are friends, I will have another one, my brother buy me. And I was just a teenager. I was very, very happy that my father is just going to take the key and now drive that brand new Land Cruiser, costing probably $70,000, $80,000. So the response that came from my father was that's a lovely car, but I wish the country was fixed like Middle East, developed like Middle East. I would have loved driving that car. If I take your car to my village, my own elder, my own tribesman will run away from me. But he loves sitting with me in this car. And if I take your car, I will not be able to go without a security and bulletproof jacket. But I love going on in my single gown. It didn't make sense to me back then, but today it does make sense to me. A lot of the time, we, the elites, the intellectual elites, or who were part of the government, we tend to want to give ourselves the right to decide for rural Afghans, because we consider them as backward, we consider them as unintellectual, uneducated. But we don't realize that all of the tragedy that has happened in Afghanistan is because of the intellectuals. With all due respect, the communists were intellectuals. The Islamic fundamentalists graduated from Al-Azhar were intellectuals. And then the Western bureaucrats and technocrats led by Ghani are intellectuals. It's not the villagers who have done this to Afghanistan.
You know, here in the Netherlands, majority of Afghans are Khalqin Parchami, okay? So people who were part of the communist regime. And here in the Netherlands, you know, I've spent most of my life here, and among Afghans, I have many Afghan friends who I still talk to. But among us, Roshan Fikr, is like a pejorative, okay? In Afghanistan, Roshan Fikr means enlightened. And it often refers to someone who has at least a university degree or someone who is very, very well read, a cosmopolitan, an educated, an enlightened person. But here in this country, in the Netherlands, we see most of these Afghans who are enlightened. And
Yes, please. Sorry.
yes, so we see most of these Afghans here in Europe, the exiles, who are enlightened people. But they are so close-minded and they're so biased and so full of disgust and contempt for their own people, their own traditions, their own values and everything, that they often talk, oh, you're also Roshan Fikr and you're Roshan Fikr like us, and but at the same time, it's like talking to people who are very close-minded. So that's why we often say here, yes, that so and so is Roshan Fikr, which means that person is not really someone you want to talk to.
Which is very true. To be honest, we all have our own biases. If we say that I don't have any biases, I will be wrong. We will all be wrong. We all have our own prejudices. But the key is, how do you make sure that you put them aside when it comes to dealing with people? How do you make sure that does not interfere with your decision making? What we have been saying is that when it comes to life, an Afghan who has died in rural Afghanistan because of a drone strike or nitrate operation as a collateral damage, vis-a-vis an Afghan who has died in urban Afghanistan because of a bomb attack or some attack as a collateral damage, there should be no difference. Because if we get to this whole concept of war studies, a drone strike and a suicide attack, it's merely a difference of means. It's merely a difference of means. And both of them will, one perhaps more likely than other, will result in collateral damage. But why is it that rural blood does not attract enough attention as the urban blood?
I've, speaking of the enlightened and Roshan Fikr, a lot of the times, what I've been approached with is like, oh, you have a master's from King's College and you're still a donkey.
Yes.
So you were born and brought up in the UK. You speak the Queen's English. You have a master's. What a waste. What a waste if this is how you think.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I'll be honest with you, that sort of criticism has never angered me.
Yeah.
And it's never angered me because it comes from people that think that education, or more specifically Western education, produces robots that think exactly the same way about everything. If people like that are offended that, let's say, you were born, bred, whatever, you came up through an education, and now you could say, someone with, let's say, independent thought, if they're offended by that, you're doing something right. Okay? Because it's that intolerance at its very core, that intolerance, ironically, in the name of tolerance, that has been weaponized to destroy Afghanistan and break its back for the last 40 years. If that is, if that is what you're confronted with, then I would say you're on the good side.
Graduated from an American school.
Yes.
Co-education, have traveled the world, have been to Asia, to Europe, to America, to Southeast Asia, traveled the world, and yet you are like, what is wrong with you?
Cosmopolitan, and yet you're still a donkey. But
on one note, Sangarjana, all of us personally, the aspiration for Afghanistan to be developed, to be intact, inshallah, uh, to have a societal cohesion, to have a self-societal consciousness, to have sustainable development, stability, peace, prosperity, women's development, where women contribute along men in an equal manner. Nobody can, that desire is always there, but not when the all of these notions are cosmetic to drive attention. I've been saying this over and over again, and most of the time it becomes controversial. I say that when you're living in society where there is no respect to basic human life, human dignity, concepts such as development does not make sense. Infrastructural development does not make
You know,
sense. Women rights does not make sense. Just, you know, Sangarjana, you have March 8 or March 9 as the International Women's Day. 8. Our sisters are celebrating in small pockets in Kabul and everywhere, and Kabul and other perhaps 2, 3 urban centers, these lavish, fancy conferences and gatherings with media attention. But on the same day, you have a drone strike that has killed a woman with a 6-month baby in her lap, and nobody talks about it.
Exactly.
And nobody talks about it. So once, if you have 300 coffins, 400 coffins sent to families across the country, in Wardak, Jalalabad, Kabul, Kandahar, across the country, some part of the Taliban, some part of the ANDSF, it's all Afghans, and yet we are talking often from the same families, cousins,
yes.
And yet we are out talking about development, growth. This is just a distortion of reality, man.
There is a podcast by a military contractor, consultant of Ministry of Defence and NDS. This guy's name is Keith Lemke, and he talks about his experience in the last 14 years in Afghanistan. And in his podcast, he said something interesting. He said, we invaded Afghanistan because of 9/11, but along the way, some of the things that we said back then, we start believing them. So the whole notion of bringing democracy and equality and everything, those were things that were said to justify the occupation. But along the way, they started believing them. Now, if the Americans start believing in their own war propaganda, how about those Afghans who are now true believers in those ideas, and they think that this whole project is for that purpose?
For example, you will quote when you get into debates with the Kabul bubble that you call it, right? I call them political tourists. Okay, when you get into debate with them, you will cite that you have XYZ American general who calls this whole intervention an invasion. You have Senator XYZ calling it an invasion. XYZ professor of in some XYZ university in the United States calling it an invasion. Why are you not calling it an invasion? Because it becomes the key, because it gives sort of justification. If they call it an invasion as well, then Taliban becomes a just force, in one way or the other. So that's number one part of it. The other part of it is, debating with Kabul bubble has become extremely difficult, and I'll tell you why. When the election feud was happening, Abdullah was having his own inauguration ceremony, Ghani was having his own inauguration ceremony. There was a rumor that you will have Abdullah announcing parallel governments in the likes of Panjshir, Baghlan, Mazar, and a few other provinces. We said, look, this was one instance. The other instance was where Sigar came up with a report, for example, that Taliban now control 47% or contest 47% of the Afghan territory. Now, the way the Kabul bubble would argue with you and debate with you, they would be like, look, Abdullah cannot announce parallel governments in Mazar. He can announce it in Panjshir, but what is he going to do in Panjshir? And we tell them, well, it's a matter of principle. The principle of governance will be challenged if we, what is going to, because this whole thing runs on principle. For example, when it comes to the report of Sigar saying, the Inspector General for the Afghan reconstruction, saying that you have 47% of the territory under controlled or contested by the Taliban, they would be like, no, it's not 47%, it's merely 20%. And we're like, well, it's a matter of principle. What happens to this, even if it's 0.01%, what happens to the notion of territorial integrity, sovereignty? What happens to all those concepts? Because these are the foundations of governance. In a basic conversation, if you have with them, you tell them that how is it that things have improved? They're like, well, we inherited a very corrupt system from President Karzai. But you tell them that it's been almost more than a decade, more than a half a decade. You give them, you'd be like, okay, you put down any 5 indicators, and you tell them that they have increased since 2017, let's assume, or 2016 or 2015. Whether it's NDSF casualties, whether it's employment, whether it's maternal mortality rate, paternal mortality rate, whether it's territory control, you put any indicator that you think have improved. The corruption perception index, we have improved 1 step, and that's not because we have done well, it's because another country has done bad than us. So that's how we have improved. And none of the indicator is, you realize that last year was better than this year. In fact, last month was better than this month. And you have this concept of the status quo that we call deteriorating status quo. And the expectation is, you tell them this is what drives them crazy, this drives them nuts. You'd be like, we do not expect you to make things better for us. Why don't you maintain this already worsened status quo? Keep it at the way it is. Make sure it doesn't get worse. But 3 months later, you realize it has gone further worse.
On that note, we're going to wrap that up. So we've got Habib Wardak, with whom we've just recorded a thoroughly enlightening podcast on his experiences working at the very center of the Afghan state in the Ministry of Defence, his family background, his education. And so, Habib, if anyone wants to contact you, what is the best way for them to...
I think it would be my email.
Your email? Okay. We'll provide your email address in the description box. From myself and from Sangar, we are back on the Afghan Eye podcast after a very long time.
Or they can DM me on Twitter as well. So
okay, we'll put your Twitter handle on. We'll put your Twitter handle there. From myself and from Sangar, for our loyal listeners, viewers, readers, subscribers, we've been gone for quite a while. So we're glad to be back. We're happy to be back. The reason we've been gone for a while is because, once again, Sangar and I, we run the Afghan Eye as freelancers. We do this independently. The platform is operated independently. That means that we can talk about the things that international media won't talk about because it's got conflicts of interest. What it also means is that we run the platform independently on top of our day-to-day sort of responsibilities, personal, professional, otherwise. So we apologize for the delay in our content. However, we've come back possibly with, one of the best, if not the best podcasts that we've recorded. So please bear with us, be patient. More content is coming your way. We're planning on writing more articles over the coming weeks and months, recording more podcasts with more guests over the coming weeks and months. Don't forget to like and share our content. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you want to get involved, please consider becoming patrons on our Patreon page or sending a donation directly via PayPal so that you can help us to help you to understand Afghanistan better with our articles and the diversity of guests which we bring to the podcast. On that note, Habib Wardak, خدای دی راوله ډیر خوشاله سم چې زموږ پادکاسټ ته راغله سنگرم thank you to you as well from myself and from Sangar Paikar and from Habib Wardak. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.